Welcome to Orion Philosophy, where we explore, discuss and dissect areas of practical philosophy for use in everyday life. To bear trials with a calm mind robs misfortune of its strength and burden. The world around us is full of things that threaten our peace of mind. Whether it's someone cutting us off in traffic, our boss asking us to work late again, an argument with our partner, crash in the stocks or crypto markets, or comparing your life to the meticulously selected and edited photos you see scrolling through social media. Generally, there are two ways we process these kind of things. For this explanation, I'll call them default and deliberate. Default is the state where we're essentially on autopilot. We react impulsively, and because we're on autopilot and there's no filter between the stimulus and the response, we essentially allow these impulses to dictate our mental state. If we get cut off in traffic, we get angry. If we're asked to work late, we get resentful. If we argue with our partner, we get defensive. And every day, every week, and every year of our life, our well-being is in the hands of the events around us. Our mental state becomes tightly bound to these externals, and as a result, it becomes fragile. Our mood comes and goes like the tide, and we wonder why we can't find lasting happiness. On the other hand, deliberate is the state in which we take responsibility for how we perceive what happens around us, how we respond to it, and how much we allow externals to influence our well-being. Instead of reacting impulsively, we put a mental gate between stimulus and our response. This gate allows us to quarantine stimulus for a while, allows us to question it and look at it from different angles, and then ultimately allow us to decide deliberately how we react. The more we exercise this, the stronger the gate becomes, and the faster we are able to process stimulus. Our well-being is no longer in the hands of externals, it is ours to decide. Our mental state becomes resilient to what happens around us, and we are better able to find lasting happiness and well-being. This is the value that the Stoics have left with us, a practical life philosophy that gives us the tools to hold stimulus in a sort of mental quarantine before they can infect the rest of our mind with whatever negativity may come from perceiving them in a destructive way, especially when we get into the habit of responding to negative things by default.
What's the clause?
More than 2,000 years ago, the ancient Stoics gathered in Athens to discuss how to live a good life, a life of flourishing, well-being and mental resilience. They considered the question how to live with virtue, the four core Stoic virtues being wisdom, discipline, temperance, and courage. And we'll go into a bit more detail about what these four mean later on. Stoicism is a school of ancient Hellenistic philosophy founded around 300 BC by a man named Zeno of Citium. Before choosing the path of the philosopher, Zeno was a wealthy merchant, and he made good money sailing from port to port around Cyprus and Greece. Zeno was described as a thin, dark-skinned man, and despite his wealth, he was said to have lived a frugal and simple life. And to his misfortune, he found himself washing up on the shores of Greece, after losing his ship to sea. Without his livelihood, Zeno made his way to Athens. Here he is said to have read the accounts of Socrates in an Athenian bookseller's. So impressed was Zeno with what he read, that he asked the bookseller where he can find men such as Socrates, to which the bookseller pointed out Crates of Thebes, a prominent Cynic philosopher at the time in Athens. So then Zeno began to study Cynic philosophy under Crates, and expanded his learning with a handful of other teachers and schools of thought like Platonism. In 301 BC, Zeno began to teach his own philosophy in the colonnade of the Agora of Athens known as the Stoa Poikile, or painted porch. It is this Stoa which gave his students the name of Stoics. Anyone was welcome to come and listen and debate ideas. Zeno's philosophy concerned itself with finding ways to live the best possible life, one which through living in accordance with nature led to happiness, well-being, virtue, and free from needless suffering. I will note that being free from needless suffering is not the same as being free from all suffering. It's simply not suffering any more than is necessary. So what did the Stoics believe? And how did they go about finding happiness and well-being, or what they called Eudaimonia? Stoic philosophy is one of practicality, a toolbox that we can all use for everyday life, and focuses on one question: how can we find a path to happiness? In ancient Greece and Rome, Stoicism was the philosophy for the everyday men and women of the world, not just for educated aristocrats, or isolated philosophers in their halls of books, or silent sages up their mountains. It was practiced anywhere from emperors to soldiers, and was applicable to both. For the Stoics, the practical path to Eudaimonia is grounded in a few core principles: the ability to view ourselves, the world, and its people objectively, and accept their nature as it is, rather than projecting our own opinions onto them about how we think they should be. Generally, the greater the distance between what we think something should be and what it is in reality, the greater the amount we suffer. The discipline to prevent ourselves from being controlled by the desires for pleasure or the fear of pain and suffering. The ability to behave with Stoic virtue, wisdom, temperance,
Where have you been,
justice, and courage, and making the distinction between what is within our power to influence and what is not. Using this information, we can act what can be acted upon, and we can dismiss what can't. Stoic philosophy grew to be one of the most prominent schools of thought in ancient Greece and Rome, and it became so popular because it works. This was a time in history where war, famine, exile, death, and disease was far more common than it is today in our modern world. The potential for suffering was everywhere, and these are exactly the conditions in which Stoic philosophy thrives. And while we don't live in the same world as our ancestors, we do have our own problems to contend with, and the philosophy of the Stoics is just as applicable today. Stoic philosophy teaches us that we are not disturbed by events, only how we respond to them. They also teach that very little is inside our control, simply our thoughts, beliefs, perceptions, and actions. These two ideas are important for a number of reasons. Firstly, it instructs us to take responsibility for how we view things, understanding that our perceptions of things is a core source of suffering. Rather than just blaming the world or other people for our situation or our mood, we are empowered to accept that it is us who create our own happiness. Secondly, it draws a line between what we do and do not have control over. Many people suffer because we get upset about or try to control the things in life that we have no control over. And of course, this ultimately leads us to feel helpless, ineffective, powerless, bitter, resentful, and therefore we suffer. However, when we focus on what we can control, we start to become effective and efficient. We problem solve more easily, and we suffer less. The key to this is to accept that there is very little within our control, and focus our efforts on the small patch of land that we own. A farmer will have a better harvest if they focus on planting, tending to, and harvesting their own crops, rather than focusing on their neighbor's field, which they have no control over. But instead of crops, we have our thoughts, our actions, our perspectives, and our beliefs. The ancient Stoics used 4 core Stoic virtues as a guide for their actions, an inner compass to point them in the right direction during times of hardship, times of confusion, and the day-to-day decisions of everyday life. Many even went so far as to suggest that virtue is the path to happiness, and that ethics is the primary concern for human understanding, and that through ethics, the ability to tell right from wrong, and living in line with the nature of the world around you, we naturally become happier and are better able to work to the betterment of the self and the community. The Stoics believed that people who lack virtue are blindly pulled along by whatever pulls at their desire. The philosopher Cleanthes once said that these people are like a dog tied to a cart, compelled to go wherever the cart goes. Rather than being pulled behind the cart of desire, The Stoics would look at a situation and decide how to respond. They learnt to untie themselves from being pulled along, and in doing so, they learnt the ability to be happy in hardship, content in adversity, and accepting in loss. In part, it is the development of virtue that helps cut these strings that drag our emotions and well-being through the dirt whenever we experience pain, loss, and hardship. These Stoic virtues are wisdom, seeing things for what they are, not what we wish they would be. In his lectures, Epictetus said, "The chief task in life is simply this, to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control, and which have to do with the choices I actually control. Where then do I look for good and evil? Not to uncontrollable externals, but within myself, to the choices that are my own." Courage, acting in the right way despite fear or reservation. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote, "There are misfortunes which strike the sage, without incapacitating him, of course, such as physical pain, infirmity, the loss of friends or children, or the catastrophes of his country when it is devastated by war. I grant that he is sensitive to these things, for we do not impute to him the hardness of a rock or of iron. There is no virtue in putting up with the fact that one does not feel it." Justice, acting fairly despite the pressures not to. The Stoic Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote, "And a commitment to justice in your own acts, which means thoughts and actions resulting in the common good, what you were born to do. Temperance, acting in discipline and self-control, despite the draws of passion and greed." Marcus Aurelius also wrote, "If you seek tranquility, do less, or more accurately, do what's essential, what the logos of a social being requires, and in the requisite way, which brings a double satisfaction, to do less better. Because most of what we say and do is not essential. If you can eliminate it, you'll have more time and more tranquility. Ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary?" While the Stoics use these virtues to direct their actions and behavior, they are useless if we can't develop the headspace to use them. If we're too consumed by our unconscious feelings in the moment to become conscious and decide how to respond. Simply put, if we remain like the dog being pulled by the cart, we will always go where the cart goes, and never go where we would like to go. The author of Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, wrote about stimulus and response, and he said that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lies our growth and our freedom. We need to learn how to create this space, and when we find ourselves in it, we are able to decide how to react to a situation, rather than letting our unconscious react for us. Regardless of whether we want to live in alignment with the Stoic virtues, or reflect different virtues that we've chosen for ourselves, if our aim is to live deliberately and unhitch ourselves from impulsive behavior and snap judgments, learning to find this space is essential.
Off we go now.
There is a concept in Stoic philosophy that can transform our frustrations into acceptance, our anger into understanding, and can help us focus our limited time each day on the things that create real impact and change in our life, rather than mistakenly and unknowingly focusing on the things that waste it. This is the Stoic concept of control. Simply put, we can't always control what happens to us, but we can always decide how we react to it. Our response is our responsibility, and it's a choice. Today we're going to explore the ancient Stoic philosophy behind this concept and look at how we can implement it in our daily life. The philosopher Epictetus was born into slavery in ancient Greece. He was permitted by his master to study Stoic philosophy under the guidance of philosopher Musonius Rufus. Epictetus earned his freedom around the age of 18, shortly after the death of Emperor Nero. With this newfound freedom, he took to Rome to teach his philosophy for a further 25 years, until Emperor Domitian banned philosophers from the city because of the threat their free thinking had on the control of his rule. This meant that Epictetus ended up leaving Rome and settling in the newly formed city of Nicopolis in ancient Greece. Here he lived a simple life and founded a school of philosophy where he taught until he passed away from old age.
Come on.
Sadly, Epictetus didn't write any of his work down. However, we are left with the work of one of his students who transcribed the lectures of Epictetus close to word for word. Of 8 books written, only 4 survive. But for me, these 4 contain some of the best practical philosophy from the ancient world. Within this is one of the core teachings of Epictetus' Stoic philosophy, the concept of control. He taught that a path to a happy life, a life of what the Stoics called Eudaimonia, can be found in 2 things. The first is correctly identifying what is within our control and identifying what is not. The second is focusing our efforts on the things within our control and learning to accept what is not with grace and understanding. This distinction is an important one because no matter how much we try, no matter how upset we get or frustrated we become, we cannot change the things outside the reach of our control. A life of attempting to do so will undoubtedly result in bitterness, frustration, and wasted effort. On the other hand, a life focused on doing what we can with what we have, and focusing on what's within our power, is much more likely to be productive, effective, and altogether more constructive.
Come on.
Epictetus said, "The chief task in life is simply this, to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself, which are externals not under my control, and which have to do with the choices I actually control. Where then do I look for good and evil? Not to uncontrollable externals, but within myself, to the choices that are my own." This particular concept in Stoicism is widely known as the dichotomy of control. So called because things are really only divided into what we can control and what we can't. Epictetus took this further and helped describe exactly what's within our power and what's not. He also helped us understand the pitfalls of spending too much time focusing on changing what we have no power to change, and the benefits of focusing on the areas of life within our power to change. In his writing, his student recounts the following. There are things that are within our power, and things that fall outside our power. Within our power are our own opinions, aims, desires, dislikes. In a sum, our own thoughts and actions. Outside our power are our physical characteristics, the class into which we were born, our reputation in the eyes of others, and honors and offices that may be bestowed on us. Working within our sphere of control, we are naturally free, independent and strong. Beyond that sphere, we are weak, limited and dependent. If you pin your hopes on things outside your control, taking upon yourself things which rightfully belong to others, you are liable to stumble, fall, suffer, and blame both gods and men. But if you focus your attention only on what is truly your own concern, and leave to others what concerns them, then you will be in charge of your interior life. No one will be able to harm or hinder you. You will blame no one, and have no enemies. If you wish to have peace and contentment, release your attachment to all things outside your control. This is the path of freedom and happiness. If you want not just peace and contentment, but power and wealth too, you may forfeit the former in seeking the latter, and will lose your freedom and happiness along the way. The Stoic Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius also wrote about similar concepts in his journal. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." So how can we harness this Stoic practice and turn it into a daily habit to increase our happiness and resilience? For me, a good and important first step is training our mind to quickly sort the things around us and within us into one of two categories. Essentially inside our control or outside our control. And then something a lot easier said than done, we have to learn to accept the things that are outside our control as they are, and at the same time take full responsibility for everything inside our control. These two things are important because when we get it wrong, we suffer. And we normally suffer in one of two ways. The first way we suffer is trying to control things in life we have no influence over. This can be other people, their beliefs, their thoughts, actions and values, the weather, the traffic, the economy, politics, time and many, many other things. Obviously, when we try and control the uncontrollable, we're putting effort into an endeavor in which we have no leverage. This results in us having little or no impact. And this result ends up with us feeling powerless, frustrated, anxious, ineffective, bitter and angry. In a nutshell, we suffer. No one likes to put effort into something and get nothing in return. Or worse yet, put effort into something and get the complete opposite we want in return. And because we have no control over these situations, If we attach our happiness to them, we're essentially putting our happiness into the hands of chance and the hands of the whim of the world around us. So it's easy to see why this is not a resilient form of happiness. If everything is going well around us, we'll be happy. If everything is going poorly, we'll be sad. Our happiness will come and go based on external events and how they transpire, which is a very fragile way of living. The second way we suffer is we don't take responsibility for what we can control. These are our beliefs, our values, our perspectives, and our actions. When we don't take responsibility for these things and instead blame the world or other people for things like our actions, we're essentially saying that we don't have autonomy over what we do and who we are. This is a very helpless mindset to have, and it will wear you down over time. People stuck here often complain, moan, point fingers, whinge, and create a mentality of victimhood because the world is always acting upon them. And as they respond to the world acting upon them, they blame what happens in the world for their response. This is not a healthy place to be, because if we believe that we don't have any control over our actions, our perspectives, values, and beliefs, there's nothing we can do to get out of the situation we're in. We just have to wait until the world around us does something that creates an outcome in us that we're happy with. And again, it's probably easy to see why this way of living doesn't produce lasting and resilient happiness, because everything is still at the whim of the world around us. Our well-being is beholden to externals, rather than being our responsibility to cultivate. The Stoic dichotomy of control helps us shift our perspective of these things in two important ways. When we are able to determine what is outside our control, we no longer waste our time and energy trying to change it. We see it for what it is, we accept it, and we move on to what we can control. When we are able to determine what is within our control, we are able to focus our time and energy here, taking responsibility and taking actions in these areas to move forward. Epictetus also said, "Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens." And it's all well and good understanding these logically, but it takes practice, and it requires deliberate effort to start building those mental pathways. But if you stick with it, soon splitting these things into two different categories becomes second nature. And you'll naturally see these two pathways and use it to determine how to act in the face of events around you. And to leave you with some final thoughts, in his book, A Guide to the Good Life, William Irvine explores this subject of control and describes the following. Remember that the things over which we have complete control are the goals we set for ourselves. I think that when a Stoic concerns himself with the things over which he has some but not complete control, such as winning a tennis match, he will be very careful about the goals he sets for himself. In particular, he will be careful to set internal rather than external goals. Thus, his goal in playing tennis will not be to win the match, something external, over which he has only partial control, but to play to the best of his ability in the match, something internal, over which he has complete control. By choosing this goal, he will spare himself the frustration or disappointment should he lose the match. Since it was not his goal to win the match, he will not have failed to attain his goal as long as he played his best. His tranquility will not be disrupted. Irvine also wrote, "Stoics would recommend, for example, that I concern myself with whether my wife loves me, even though this is something over which I have some but not complete control. But when I do concern myself with this, my goal should not be the external goal of making her love me. No matter how hard I try, I could fail to achieve this goal, and would as a result be quite upset. Instead, my goal should be an internal goal, to behave to the best of my ability in a lovable manner. Similarly, my goal with respect to my boss should be to do my job to the best of my ability. These goals I can achieve no matter how my wife and my boss subsequently react to my efforts." By internalizing his goals in daily life, the Stoic is able to preserve his tranquility while dealing with things over which he has only partial control. Death and our impermanence has a profound impact on the way we view the world, the way we view ourselves and the people around us. If we view death in a destructive way, it will hang over us, clouding everything we do. However, there is a way to view death that adds gratitude and vibrance to life, and this perspective employed by the Stoics is exactly what we're going to explore today. The fear of death is something we all encounter at different points in our life, whether it's dealing with the grief and feelings of loss of the death of a loved one, coming to terms with the fact that a loved one may soon pass, or simply the struggle we all have knowing that one day we will be gone. Today we're going to primarily be exploring Stoic philosophy to find out how not only we can reduce our fear of death, but also use the ever-present reality that one day we won't be here anymore as a tool to look at everything around us and use our mortality as a tool for gratitude. This practice is widely known as memento mori, roughly translating from Latin as remembering mortality. When you strip humans down to our bare bones, generally our basic instinctive wiring is to survive and replicate. And given that that is true, death is clearly a non-desirable. So much so that we don't even like thinking about it, we don't like contemplating it, and in extreme cases we don't even like accepting it as a reality. And while the denial of death can make us feel warm and fuzzy, it can also lock us out of the practical benefits that come from its contemplation. After all, we are all going to die. We're all temporary. Our time is limited, and our experience of this life will come to an end. Stoicism tells us that reminding ourselves of this reality can have a huge improvement on the way we live. The Stoics taught that in the constant reminder of death, we can learn how to live the way we live. Almost counterintuitively, thinking about death can help us live better, happier, and more present lives. So we've gone through a bit about what memento mori is. Now let's have a look at how exactly it can achieve what I've just described. The concept of memento mori has spanned both time and culture. We've already seen that the Stoics use memento mori, but it's also been used by people like the Buddhists, all in an effort to learn how to live better lives. And as we've said, it's the reminder that your death is inevitable, that your time is limited. And one day there will be a day where you and I won't wake up to enjoy the beautiful experience of life. With modern medicine as it is, death is a guarantee. No matter where you were born, how rich you are, or what you were doing during your life, there will be a day where you die. At least until someone comes up with a way not to. And on that day, we will be asking ourselves entirely new philosophical questions. Ultimately, death is simply change, and change is the nature of the universe. However, for those of us who know how to use it, the reality of death helps us cultivate a greater appreciation of life. If you can humor me for a moment and imagine that you only have 1 week left to live. Now imagine that in this last remaining week, you have a list of things you want to do, people that you want to spend time with, and places that you want to go. For most of us, we have a pretty short list of things that we do in a week, and it normally includes the people we love, the things we love doing, or the things we've always wanted to do but never have. Memento mori uses this same principle, but instead of only having a week to live and think about death, we have our entire life. Memento mori allows us to look honestly at our mortality, and in doing so it helps us clarify what's important. It helps us find our values. It helps us be grateful for things because we know that these things are limited. And it helps us focus on problems that really matter, not the small insignificant bickering that ultimately wastes our time and doesn't add any value to our lives. Ancient Stoic philosophy is full of examples that instruct its students to meditate on death and to contemplate their mortality. In his letters, Seneca speaks of the benefits from meditating on death. He wrote the following: "Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. The one who puts the finishing touches on their life each day is never short of time." The Stoic philosopher Epictetus recommends that whenever you spend time with your loved ones, whenever you hug your family or kiss your partner, you should remind yourself that they are mortal. There will come a day where the people you love will no longer be there. This reminder is not intended to make us sad, and it's not intended to be morbid, but it does help us to appreciate what we have and really focus and be present when we're with these people, because we never really know how much time we have left with them. The Stoic philosopher and emperor of Rome, Marcus Aurelius, also practiced memento mori, contemplating his own mortality to guide his actions. In the book Meditations, he wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." Stoic philosophers did not see death as a morbid idea to be avoided. It was a core aspect of life that needed to be accepted, even embraced, and ultimately used as a tool to appreciate each new day, remaining grateful for the time that we have, and guiding our actions. After all, death is ultimately outside the reach of our control. It's true that we can eat well, we can exercise, we can sleep well, and do what we can to live a long and happy life, but ultimately our end will come. And like anything outside our control, Worrying too much and focusing too much energy here ultimately does us no good. Shifting to another philosopher, in Plato's recount of the death of Socrates, arguably Athens' most famous philosopher, Socrates famously met death with a calm indifference, and his last words were said to be uttered to a close friend about paying a debt of chickens. Plato argues that the study of philosophy is about nothing else but dying. It is a path taken to find a way of living and a way of thinking about life that ultimately allows us to face death calmly and with grace. The concept of memento mori is not just found in Western philosophy, it also echoes in Eastern philosophy as well. I'm sure we've all heard of the samurai. As a kid, we probably all wanted to be one, or at least at some point pretended to be one. The samurai used death as a mental practice to enjoy life, to conquer fear, and ultimately become better warriors. The way of the samurai is, morning after morning, the practice of death, considering whether it will be here or there, imagining the most sightly way of dying, and putting one's mind firmly in death. Although this might be a most difficult thing, if one will do it, it can be done. There is nothing that one should suppose cannot be done. There is a comparison that can be made between human life and the Japanese cherry blossoms. In Japan, the cherry blossom has become part of the culture, and the pink-white blossoms can be followed through the country as the blossom moves with the change in temperature. A large part of what makes the blossom beautiful is that they only last for a short period of time. In a similar way, enjoyment of life becomes more profound because it's fleeting. The Buddhists of Tibet have a practice called the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. One of these thoughts is the contemplation of death and of our impermanence. It consists of the following: all things made from other things are impermanent. The human body is a thing made from other things. Therefore, the death of the body is certain. The time of death is uncertain and beyond our control. It's very easy to see a parallel here between Buddhism and Stoicism. But this Buddhist idea specifically was designed for daily contemplation. It was done to prevent the natural human tendency to behave as though we have all the time in the world. This central teaching of Buddhism is called mercenaries, or death awareness, and is thought to be a core part of living a better life. This is a tool that we can all use in day-to-day life. All of this helps us become aware of how short our time really is, and in doing so helps us question whether or not we are making the most of the time we have. And to close with some final thoughts, for me memento mori is made up of a certain amount of order and chaos. Left to its own devices, our base human nature is pretty chaotic. Without us putting in some effort to stop it, our mind starts to tick over and over in unconscious loops, essentially putting us into autopilot. And with how busy our modern day is, it's easy for our mind to always have something to pick up and think about. Before we know it, we've woken up, we've had breakfast, we've gone to work, we've come home from work, we've stuck the TV on and we've gone to bed. And in that time, we're mostly on autopilot. We haven't really been present, and we take a lot of what's around us for granted. This unconscious chaos can be balanced with order when we take the time to consciously be aware of what's around us, consciously be aware of the moment, and consciously be grateful not only for the time we have, but for the people and experiences that fill that time, and also grateful for ourselves. We're often far too hard on ourselves, magnifying our mistakes and pushing aside our achievements. But balanced gratitude for me isn't just about being grateful for what's around us, it's also being grateful for who we are and what we've gone through. This order helps us appreciate what we have, and prevents that autopilot from ticking over and taking everything for granted. Modern life can be chaotic and frustrating at times. We've all had days where we felt overwhelmed with work, responsibilities, grief, pain, and any number of external events that threaten to destabilize our peace of mind. Here at Orion Philosophy, we bring out videos every week specifically to tackle the imbalance between sources of suffering in the world around us and the tools that we're given to deal with them. It's great to see the community growing around this goal, and if you think it's something that you'd like, feel free to sub and join us. To that end, today we're going through the Stoic principle of amor fati, and the practice of shifting our perception of the things around us, from resistance and suffering, to acceptance, understanding, and ultimately love. Ancient Stoic philosophy contains a number of core practices that help the practitioner change the way they look at life, and in such a way that their burdens are lessened, their stress is eased, and in many cases they go through a transformation of things they once thought to be sources of pain and hardship, and shift them into sources of strength and understanding. We'll be covering exactly what amor fati means, and looking specifically at how you can use it in your day-to-day life to help balance, develop, and maintain your mental well-being. Socrates once said that we are the caretakers of our soul, and hopefully today you'll take away some tools to become exactly that. First of all, if amor fati is learning to love fate, what exactly do we mean when we say fate? To be honest, this can be interpreted in many different ways. For me personally, a practical definition of fate in this context is simply the unraveling of everything that has happened, everything that is happening, and everything that will happen. These happenings are determined by the nature of the world around us, they're determined by the laws of physics, and the events that have transpired previously, leading to subsequent events, like complex dominoes knocking into one another. This domino analogy might bring up questions about determinism or free will, and it's outside the scope of this video. However, if you personally have an opinion on free will or determinism, let me know in the comments down below because I think it's a fascinating topic. But coming back to fate, I don't think that fate in this context has anything to do with an overall universal consciousness or anything deliberately dictating what does and doesn't happen. So then what is amor fati? Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart." Literally speaking, amor fati is a Latin phrase that translates roughly as love of fate, and it's been used for thousands of years to describe a state of mind or a practice in which you accept and even embrace everything that has happened, is happening, and has yet to happen. It's the mindset of understanding and accepting that the nature of the universe is change, that much of this change is outside the reach of our control, and that without this change we would not exist, our relationships wouldn't exist, we wouldn't laugh, cry, love, create, or grow. Without everything that has come before now, and without everything that is happening now, we wouldn't experience any of what life has to offer, both the good and the bad. And in this way, from this perspective, we can learn to love everything that has come before us, and everything that's happening around us, and then by extension, learn to love fate. Marcus Aurelius also wrote, "Frightened of change, but what can exist without it? What's closer to nature's heart? Can you take a hot bath and leave the firewood as it was? Eat food without transforming it? Can any vital process take place without something being changed? Can't you see it's just the same with you, and just as vital to nature?" Hopefully this gives context about what amor fati actually means, and some insight into the practice itself. But it's one thing to understand something, and another thing to implement it. So how can we practically use amor fati in our day-to-day lives? Viktor Frankl was a Jewish psychotherapist who lived during World War II, and during the war he was sent to various concentration camps, including Auschwitz. Frankl ultimately survived the horrors of the war and went on to write a book called Man's Search for Meaning. It's not a very big book, but I highly recommend reading it. Almost every page has some value on how to develop a resilient personal philosophy, and to anyone who's interested, I'll include a link down below in the description. Frankl had a very simple personal philosophy, one that he credited for helping him survive the hardships and adversities of the concentration camps, until he was ultimately rescued by Allied forces in April 1945. His philosophy echoes the teachings of the Stoics. You can't always control the events that happen to you in your life, but you can always control how you respond to them. And this is how we use concepts of practical philosophy, not to exert any more control over the world around us, but to take full responsibility and ownership for how you view it, and how you respond to it, making a conscious decision to change your perceptions for the better. If we take responsibility for this, we no longer point fingers and blame the world or other people when we're upset or angry or frustrated or sad. We look inward to find out why we're acting like this, and then we make conscious decisions to change our perceptions for the better. Of course, I'm not saying that all negative emotion is bad, but what I am saying is those emotions are our responsibility, and not just those emotions, but how we act and respond to the world as a result of them. So if we take responsibility for our response to the world, and we take responsibility for making conscious decisions to change our perception of things for the better. With amor fati, this means changing how we perceive what's happened to us, or is happening to us. We can start by asking ourselves pointed questions. Have we suffered and struggled? Yes. Can we go back and avoid the struggle? No. So if we can't go back and change the past, the next best thing is accepting that it has happened and finding the good in it. Whether it's something in the hardship that taught us more about ourselves, or a lesson learnt that can help us or others avoid similar hardship in the future. Have we experienced loss? How did that teach us to appreciate what we have and not take things for granted? Did we lose our job? What doors did that open that may have remained closed? Did someone mistreat us? Did that person showing that side of them end a relationship that could have gone on for longer and been more destructive? This may seem overly optimistic, but when these events have already happened, really we get no benefit from walking around with negativity or resentment about them. Negativity won't change the past. However, optimism and a deliberate choice regarding how we look at the past can improve how we live right now in the present. One thing about amor fati that I do want to touch on quickly is that it often gets confused with a passive defeatist acceptance of the world around us. That this practice leads us to accept the wrongs of the world, and to lie down as we observe the passing of things that we don't agree with, or wrongdoing we see being committed. This is not the case. Acceptance of reality is not the same as submitting to it. It's simply learning the ability to see objectively and accepting that in this moment, that is the state of the world. There's often little value in seeing the world as you want to see it, rather than seeing it as it is, other than getting a warm fuzzy feeling as you pull the wool over your own eyes. And this acceptance of reality is the ability to look at reality clearly and not through the lens of our own bias and expectations. In doing so, we are more able to understand what's within our control and what is not. And then if we deem it appropriate, we can look to leverage that control to effect change first in ourselves, and then if possible in the world around us for the better. Amor fati is often credited to the Stoics. Epictetus, the slave who later became a philosopher, talked about similar concepts. And as we've already seen, the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote about fate in his journal, a journal that later became known as Meditations. Later philosophers like Nietzsche explicitly used the term amor fati in their writings. Nietzsche wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati. That one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. Not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it, but love it." My interpretation of this is that Nietzsche is saying that we should not hide from fate. We shouldn't conceal fate, nor should we wish it to be different. Ultimately, fate is what it will be, not what we wish it will be. So we should accept it. However, more than just acceptance, we should learn to love fate and embrace it. He went on to write further, "For nothing is self-sufficient, neither in us ourselves, nor in things. And if our soul has trembled with happiness, and sounded like a harp string just once, all eternity was needed to produce this one event. And in this single moment of affirmation, all eternity was called good, redeemed, justified, and affirmed." For me here, Nietzsche is saying that when we are happy, the entire world and all of history was necessary to lead up to that moment of happiness. Without that history, you would not be here, and you would not have felt that happiness. So if you resist, hate, or complain about fate, you are resisting the conditions that have given you life. Again, like a set of dominoes knocking over one another. The first domino is needed for the last to fall. In the same way, all of the conditions of the past were needed for you to be here right now. Many of us have either struggled or are struggling with self-image, insecurity, and doubt. But what if I told you that ancient Stoic philosophy may contain fundamental principles that could provide the keys to supercharge your sense of self, increase your inner confidence, and your ability to shrug off negativity of the world around you? Over the next few minutes, my goal will be to show you that Stoicism does include things that can do this, and I'll describe how we can apply these timeless principles to transform the view we have of ourselves and of the world around us. In this video, we'll break down some of the roots of low self-esteem, and we'll discuss specific Stoic strategies that we can use to guide us on our path to self-improvement. We'll also provide practical steps for implementing these principles in our daily life, allowing us to cultivate a greater sense of resilience to the pressures of the outside world, an inner peace that comes from knowing who we are and who we want to be, and a strong sense of self-worth that comes from closing the gap between who we are now and that ideal version of ourselves. Welcome to Orion Philosophy, where we explore, discuss and dissect areas of practical philosophy for use in everyday life. So let's get started on the first step. Part 1 is understanding the roots of self-esteem, and this is where we'll be going through some of the common causes. This won't be a complete list, but rather a selection of common causes which some, if not all of us, will have experienced before, and which we'll look at individually. These 3 we'll be covering are the unhealthy need for the approval of others, feeling shame or regret over past actions, and being aware of a gap between who you want to be and where we are now, and some of the confusing things like guilt and self-criticism that can come from that. If we look at the unhealthy need for the approval of others, this desire for approval and validation from those around us is not uncommon, and to some extent getting feedback from other people is necessary for being a functioning member of a group. However, it can go too far, and in recent years this has been supercharged with the rise of social media and the desires for likes, shares and comments from other people. When we feel the need for excessive reliance on external opinions, it can lead to low self-esteem when that validation does not come. This is because we've allowed our self-image to be disproportionately tied to external validation, rather than a healthy mix of self-validation and feedback from others. Stoic philosophy reminds us that we cannot control others' thoughts or feelings, and that by placing our well-being in their hands, we are essentially placing our well-being in something that we have no influence over. This by extension makes it fragile and unstable, and ultimately this means that we are vulnerable to disappointment, frustration and doubt. Epictetus, a prominent Stoic philosopher, taught us that the key to a fulfilling and content life lies in distinguishing between the things we can control and the things we cannot, and that by focusing our energy and attention on what is within our control, being our thoughts, actions and reactions, our mental well-being becomes much more resilient to the changes in our circumstances. He said, "The chief task in life is simply this, to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control and which have to do with the choices I actually control. Where then do I look for good and evil? Not to uncontrollable externals, but within myself, to the choices that are my own." Moving on to feeling shame and regret over past actions. Low sense of self can come from a deep sense of shame or regret about past actions or mistakes. When we do something that conflicts with who we are or who we want to be and the values we have, we can get that gut-wrenching reaction as a result. The Stoics teach us that dwelling on the past can be counterproductive, as we cannot change what has already happened. Instead, we should focus on learning from our experiences and making better choices as a result in the future and the present. In this way, we accept what we have done, we take responsibility for the consequences of our actions, and we move forward with the intent to improve our behavior in such a way that is deserving of our own approval. Along this path, it's important to see ourselves as human, and we all do things we regret. But accepting ourselves as a work in progress and moving forward is far more constructive than dwelling on it and kicking ourselves. Next, we have experiencing the gap between our ideal self and our current self. This can form another reason for us having a low self-image. And this is basically the awareness of the gap between where we are and where we want to be. It's not entirely uncommon to feel impatient, frustrated, or even guilty when we look at where we want to be and where we are now. However, we should just encourage ourselves to be aware of the gap and use it to find a path and motivation to grow and progress in our own personal development journey. But we shouldn't kick ourselves for not having reached that target yet. This would be like getting into our car to drive across the country and being annoyed with ourselves that we haven't arrived after a few minutes of driving. Some things simply just take time. When we set realistic goals and work towards them, we not only get a sense of accomplishment at getting closer to the person we want to be, but we also prove to ourselves that we can follow this deliberate path, build discipline, and cut out bad habits. Gradually, as we build this gap, we'll develop a stronger sense of self-worth. Now we're on to part 2, which is Stoic strategies to improve our self-image. Here we'll cover what the Stoics actually practice and what we can apply practically day to day that can help us overcome issues with how we see ourselves. Again, this will be split into 3 areas for simplicity. The first area will be focusing on what we can control and letting go of what we can't, for which we'll look to the Stoic philosopher Epictetus. The second part will be cultivating independence from external validation, for which we'll look to Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic philosopher and Emperor of Rome. And thirdly, we'll look at how the Stoics act in accordance with virtue, wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. And for this section, we'll look to Seneca, the Roman statesman and ancient Stoic philosopher. So, focusing on what we can control and letting go of what we can't. Epictetus, the slave-turned-Stoic philosopher, devoted a large part of his teachings to the importance of focusing what is within our control while letting go of what is beyond our control. This fundamental principle of Stoicism holds the key to developing a resilient and robust inner peace. A peace that's ultimately protected from the changes in our circumstances, but because it's not reliant on externals, it's reliant on who we are internally. To fully understand and apply this concept effectively, it's essential to recognize that our thoughts, actions, and reactions are the only aspects of our lives that we have direct control over. External events, people's opinions, the economy, traffic, the stock market, and even the outcomes of our actions are all beyond our control. When we focus our energy and attention on what is within the reach of our control, we can cultivate a more grounded and unshakable sense of self. For example, imagine receiving criticism or negative feedback from someone. While we cannot control their opinion of how they deliver the feedback, or indeed the opinion itself, we can control how we respond to it. We can choose to view this feedback as an opportunity for growth and self-improvement, rather than allowing it to damage our self-esteem. Or we can decide that the feedback is in bad faith, and in fact it's malicious, untrue, and simply an attempt to attack us. So we can decide not to pay any attention and just dismiss it as such. Ultimately, there is always a more constructive path forwards than letting the events around us hijack our emotions, and therefore getting frustrated, sad, or angry. Epictetus once said, "If anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, 'He was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone.'" Similarly, when faced with challenges or setbacks, we can choose to focus on our response to the events, rather than dwelling on the circumstances themselves. In essence, Epictetus's teachings guide us towards embracing our inherent power to shape our thoughts, actions, and reactions. And this Stoic approach enables us to maintain our inner peace, inner resilience, and self-worth, regardless of the challenges and uncertainties that life may present. He also said, "Seek not the good in external things, seek it in yourselves." The second Stoic rule is cultivating independence from external validation. This is probably even more relevant today than it was back then, considering the fact that we're exposed to so many different people's opinions on social media and the internet. You may have heard of a book called Meditations by the Stoic Emperor Marcus Aurelius, a private journal he kept as a way to reflect his thoughts. Aurelius's writings suggest that he understood the importance of cultivating a strong sense of self-worth that is independent from external validation. Marcus Aurelius specifically remarks on the need to behave in a way you believe to be right, not how others want you to behave. He wrote the following: "If any man despises me, that is his problem. My only concern is not doing or saying anything deserving of contempt." He also reflects on the transient nature of fame, fortune, and the opinion of others, urging us to seek validation from within, rather than relying on the ever-changing external world. On notoriety, he wrote, "Consider the lives led once by others long ago, the lives to be led by others after you, the lives led even now in foreign lands. How many people don't even know your name? How many will soon be forgotten? How many often praise now, and tomorrow perhaps contempt? That to be remembered is worthless, like fame, like everything." This is a man at the top of the Roman Empire, basically saying that fame isn't worth anything. In order to develop this independence from external validation, it is essential to develop a strong sense of self-awareness and self-understanding. Because if we don't know who we are, and we don't understand our need for fame and validation, or how it impacts us, it's going to be very difficult to disconnect from those things. This process begins with introspection, taking time to reflect on our values, beliefs, strengths, and accomplishments. When we recognize our inherent worth and the qualities that make us worthy, we can begin to appreciate ourselves and the value we can bring, regardless of whether or not we get praise or criticism from others.
Increase speed! Archers! Take your mark! Increase speed! Ship your oars! Ready the oars!
They are going to hit us!
Slow the rowers! Arrows at the ready! Moving!
Position!
Faster! Slow! More speed!
Nothing to worry about.
Forward! Rowers, slow down! Archers to the front!
Back to your marks! Watch it! It's a fire on board!
We're at full speed! Archers! Get ready to fire! Less speed now! Ready to shoot! Faster!
Pull away again after the rowers catch the thread!
Archers, we need you! Slow the ship! Rowers, go! Archers! Let's move! Slow! Archers! Head for open water!
Can't go any faster!
Slow down! Archers! Ready! Let's go!
Wait until they are in range! Under! The rowers can't lift this up! We're taking damage from that fire! Over!
More oars!
Can't be taking this much damage! I don't think they can pull the oars anymore!
Start throwing! Go! Sails down! Ship the oars! Sails up now! Oars ready! Reduce speed!
I think we're safe!
Furthermore, Marcus Aurelius emphasizes the significance of living in accordance with our inner values and principles, rather than blindly seeking to conform to the expectations of society or other individuals. Through behavior that is in alignment with our own values, beliefs, and convictions, we can experience a deep sense of integrity and self-respect,
Less speed!
knowing that we can't easily be swayed by opinion or the need for approval. Thirdly, we have acting in accordance with virtue. Seneca, another influential Stoic philosopher, argued that living a virtuous life is the path to true happiness and fulfillment. The Stoics identified 4 cardinal virtues, being wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. The Stoics argued that we should weave these virtues into our day-to-day lives, and that when we reflect virtue in our actions, thoughts, and beliefs, we are well on the path to living a good and fulfilling life. Wisdom involves
Thank the gods you came.
What happened? Where's the rest of your crew?
Pirates! They killed most of us, but they took my brother. Please, You must help him!
I'll help find your brother, sailor.
I'm not a sailor, I'm a carpenter.
So's my brother. Our father taught us.
Interesting. Our ship could use a carpenter.
I've worked as a shipwright, repaired hulls with holes the size of Poseidon's fist. Please, save my brother, and I'll join your crew.
Then it's a deal. Where can we find these pirates?
There is an island west of Eudaimonia and south of Mount Helicon. I hear they sail from there.
Anything else that might help?
I don't know. It happened so fast. Because of the war, there's more pirates about than ticks on a sow these days, but their camp can't be far.
We'll find these pirates and rescue your brother.
Will we be there soon?
Was the pursuit of knowledge, acting with reason, understanding the world around us, and developing sound judgment. In the pursuit of continual learning, seeing the world as it is rather than how we want it to be, and making well-informed decisions, we bring ourselves closer to this cardinal virtue. Courage is the ability to face challenges, adversity, and fear with determination and resolve, despite pressures not to. When we act courageously, we demonstrate our strength of character, our commitment to our principles, and our belief in our own abilities. The virtue of temperance represents moderation, self-discipline, and self-control. By practicing restraint and balance in our thoughts, actions, and emotions, we develop a sense of mastery over ourselves, which in turn enhances our self-esteem. Justice encompasses fairness, equality, and moral righteousness. By acting justly towards others and ourselves, we can build a strong moral compass. These things, to many of the Stoics, were the greatest form of good, and behaviors that help us develop a state of mind that is steadfast and fearless. Seneca once wrote, "For what prevents us from saying that the happy life is to have a mind that is free, lofty, fearless, and steadfast, a mind that is placed beyond the reach of fear, beyond the reach of desire, that counts virtue the only good, baseness the only evil, and all else but a worthless mass of things, which come and go without increasing or diminishing the highest good, and neither subtract any part from the happy life, nor add any part to it." A man thus grounded, whether he wills or not, necessarily be attended by constant cheerfulness, and a joy that is deep and issues from deep within, since he finds delight in his own resources, and desires no joys greater than his inner joys. It is not an easy thing to do to consistently reflect these virtues in every aspect of life. Even Seneca was self-aware enough to understand his own limitations. In his dialogues he wrote, "I know I'm not living the life that I am preaching, but I am trying. And trying is all we can do." And finally on to part 3, practical applications of these principles. When we apply these principles to our daily life, we can learn to close the gap between who we are and who we want to be. And again, for simplicity, I've split this into 3 steps. Firstly, how we define our ideal self and set clear goals. Secondly, how to identify habits to start and stop to help bridge that gap. And thirdly, how to plan and implement these tools in our daily life. So how can we define our ideal self and set clear goals? Generally, the journey towards building anything new begins with an understanding and imagining where we want to be. If we create a definition and an image of the person we want to be and how we want to act, we create a powerful compass that can guide our thoughts, actions, and decisions. Seneca once wrote, "If a man knows not which port he sails, no wind is favorable." That is to say, if we try to move forward without a clear destination, we have no idea if the direction we're taking is for better or for worse. To define this version of who we want to be, we'll need to dedicate some time to introspection and self-discovery. We need to reflect on our core values, our strengths, and our aspirations. and consider how Stoic virtues of wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice resonate with our own personal beliefs and how we can integrate these into our daily life. Next, we can visualize how the person we want to become would act in different areas of life, such as our relationships, our career, our personal growth, our health, and our well-being. Make sure to be specific and detailed in your visualization. For example, how would the best version of you deal with an argument in your relationship? The clearer you make this, the better your compass will be for setting goals and shaping your actions. Personally, I find the best way to do this is meditation, finding a quiet spot and sitting for some time dedicated solely on this task. Others like to journal, and others like to take voice notes. Really, you can try any number of things and just find what works for you. Once you have a clear understanding of the above, you can translate this vision into specific, measurable, achievable, and relevant goals. If you throw timing into this, you basically get the SMART acronym that's used in the business world: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-orientated. But if you're anything like me, this workplace jargon can send a shiver down your spine. But here it actually has some value. For example, if you aspire to become more disciplined and more focused, one of your goals might be to establish a consistent daily meditation practice within the next 3 months. When we work towards these goals, we gradually embody the traits, principles, and virtues that underpin a fulfilling and purpose-driven life unique to us. Moving on, how do we identify habits to start and stop and help bridge the gap? So, having defined your ideal self and set clear goals, it's time to evaluate your current habits and behaviors to determine which ones serve you and which ones hinder our progress. This recognition of habits that you should keep and that you should change will create the foundation in transforming your life to be aligned with who you want to be. A good starting point here will be to list our current habits and categorize them as either beneficial or detrimental to our goals of being who we want to be. Being honest with yourself during this process is the hardest part, because generally we're going to feel the pull of creating stories that validate some of these behaviors that we know deep down we should stop. For each detrimental habit, consider an alternative habit that is in line with your goals. For example, if you find that excessive screen time is impeding your ability to cultivate mindfulness and focus, you might replace this habit with a daily meditation practice or journaling practice. On the other side of the coin, we need to identify habits that we either need to continue or we need to adopt to get closer to our ideal self. These habits could include regular exercise, adopting a healthier diet, engaging in meaningful hobbies, or dedicating time to learning through reading, attending courses, school, or classes. Be specific about what these habits will look like in your daily routine, as this will help you implement them much more effectively. Once you have identified the habits you need to start and stop, prioritize them based on the impact they have on your life and your ability to achieve your goals. For me personally, I find it better to focus on 1 or 2 habits at a time, primarily because it stops me from getting overwhelmed and it makes it much more likely that I'll stick with them. It is also worth noting that sometimes starting something can be very difficult. In this case, we choose the smallest possible step forward and then just build on it over time. In these cases, our motivation might not be there, the discipline that requires development hasn't been developed, and the pull of activities that keep us where we are is too strong. So choose the smallest possible action and build on it. Maybe this is taking a glass or a plate from your bedroom to the kitchen. Maybe it's picking up a book instead of turning on the PlayStation. Maybe it's uninstalling Instagram. Or maybe it's getting a cheap gym membership and going once a week. Whatever it might be, we can always start small and build. And that is everything for today. I hope you found something that you can use in your daily life and get closer to the person that you've been aiming for. Much of this is common sense, but I tend to forget simple pieces of advice and need a reminder every now and then, so I hope this has helped you too. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. If you're interested in learning more, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Orion Philosophy, or you can find more information at orionphilosophy.com, where a lot of this information is in blog form, and we have the Orion Academy, which is 6 foundational principles on which to build a solid personal philosophy. Welcome to Orion Philosophy, where we explore, discuss, and dissect areas of practical philosophy for use in everyday life. The Stoics have some of the best advice on anger I've ever come across, and I believe if you take some of these lessons to heart and learn from the philosophy that's been around for over 2,000 years, you can make a meaningful difference in the way you see the world, the way you see yourself, and the way you see other people. Today I'll be doing my best to keep the message as simple and accessible as possible, while not losing any of the...
Always sending someone else to do his dirty work. How bad is it?
You're going to be fine.
You're kind. A terrible liar, but kind.
What message should I give your brother?
Tell that fool of a brother I...
the value that the Stoics included in their message. And after this introduction, I'll go over some of the lessons that the Stoics actually said and wrote, which I think are almost guaranteed to make you look at life in a slightly different way. Anger has the ability to destroy the foundation of who we are. It hijacks our emotions and our capacity for reason. And as the Stoic philosopher Epictetus teaches us, it drags us down to the level of a wild beast, petty and malignant. But it doesn't have to. To the Stoics, anger is an emotion that erodes the fabric of who we are. It causes us to behave in ways that do not align with our values, morals and beliefs. And in doing so pushes us away from the person we want to be, and the life we want to lead. Often this push of anger is towards unethical, destructive and unvirtuous behavior. These thinkers from ancient Greece believed that the path to happiness and a good life is found through a life of virtue, reason and behavior that is deliberate and in alignment with our morality. Negative emotion, of which anger is one, not only prevents this, but it acts in contrast to it, drawing us further.
Did you find my brother? Where is he?
He didn't survive. I'm sorry.
No, no, no! I curse you, gods!
There were no gods on that ship. Only pirates.
I begged him to come on this trip. He hated the sea.
A spear in my hand often helps me forget the pain. We'll put a hammer in yours, if you honor your word.
Of course. There is nothing left for me here.
Away. When we're faced with hardship, adversity, or the abrasive behavior of others, the Stoics argued that these events should not be permitted to control our emotions or permitted to control our thoughts. Instead, we should practice self-control, detachment, and focus on what we can do to improve the situation, whether that be removing ourselves from the source of the pain or working towards rising above it or passing through it with our peace of mind still intact. In general, the ancient Stoics saw anger as an irrational and destructive emotion, one that has the ability to destroy a life in seconds, and one that pulls us away from living the lives we want through its ability to ambush and control our emotions and our actions. As an antidote, they prescribe the practices of self-control, rational thinking, perspective, and the reminder that we only really have control over our thoughts and our actions. And the control of these two things should never be given to anything outside of ourselves. So here are some quotes and lessons from the Stoics themselves. From the Stoic Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Keep this thought handy when you feel a fit of rage coming on. It isn't manly to be enraged. Rather, gentleness and civility are more human, and therefore manlier. A real man doesn't give way to anger and discontent, and such a person has strength, courage, and endurance. Unlike the angry and complaining, the nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength. Say to yourself in the early morning, I shall meet today ungrateful, violent, treacherous, envious, uncharitable men. All of these things have come upon them through ignorance of real good and ill. I can neither be harmed by any of them, for no man will involve me in wrong, nor can I be angry with my kinsman or hate him, for we have come into the world to work together. How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the cause of it? In the same degree in which a man's mind is nearer to freedom from all passion, in the same degree also it is nearer to strength. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. Lessons from Epictetus. When we act pugnaciously and injuriously and angrily and rudely, to what level have we degenerated? To the level of the wild beasts. Well, the fact is that some of us are wild beasts of a larger size, while others are little animals, malignant and petty. Any person capable of angering you becomes your master. He can anger you only when you permit yourself to be disturbed by him. You must completely control your desire and shift your avoidance to what lies within your reasoned choice. You must no longer feel anger, resentment, envy, or regret. If you would cure anger, do not feed it. Say to yourself, I used to be angry every day, then every other day, now every third day or fourth day. When you reach 30 days, offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving to the gods. In the long run, every man will pay the penalty for his own misdeeds. When you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failings. Then you will forget your anger. Lessons from Seneca the Younger. The entire world would perish if pity were not to limit anger. Anger, if not restrained, is frequently more hurtful to us than the injury that provokes it. Anger is like a ruin which, in falling upon its victim, breaks itself to pieces. What is more cruel than anger? What is more affectionate to others than man? Yet what is more
What in Hades was that? Doesn't look like I'll find out through this door just yet. Maybe another time.
savage against them than anger. Mankind is born for mutual assistance, anger for mutual ruin. How much better to heal than to seek revenge from injury? Vengeance wastes a lot of time and exposes you to many more injuries than the first that sparked it. Anger always outlasts hurt. Best to take the opposite course. The greatest remedy for anger is delay. If you want to determine the nature of anything, entrust it to time. When the sea is stormy, you can see nothing clearly. Anger, though concealed, is betrayed by countenance. That anger is not warrantable which has seen two suns. Luckily for us, we have the power to change our beliefs, and in doing so we can change our experience and get closer to living a good life. And this is our responsibility. Welcome to Orion Philosophy, where we explore, discuss and dissect areas of practical philosophy for use in everyday life. Truth is not what you want it to be, it is what it is, and you must bend to its power or live a lie. Stories are interesting things. All of us gently warp reality with our different perspectives, beliefs and opinions, and these don't always reflect the true nature of the things we see. This warping can influence the way we perceive who we are, how we perceive other people, and how we perceive the very world around us. Sometimes the formation of these stories is completely subconscious. They can simply be the result of your unconscious beliefs, values and experiences. However, other times they can be far more conscious, and they can be far more deliberate decisions. Stories we tell ourselves specifically manufactured to warp the truth and to avoid hard realities that we would rather not accept. Regardless of the form our stories take, they have the potential to either be a source of support, positivity and motivation, or a source of negativity, limitation and suffering. For our own well-being, it's important that our stories work for us rather than against us. To make sure this is the case, we first need awareness of our stories, and then we need to develop understanding of how they came to be. How do stories cause suffering? When applied to our own lives, they often create a distance between us and the truth. The further the distance between reality and the stories we tell ourselves, the higher the risk that our stories will cause us suffering if we're snapped back to reality. And this suffering tends to raise its head when we get into a situation in which reality conflicts with the stories we tell ourselves. Perhaps someone does something that conflicts with your story of who they should be. Or maybe the world itself doesn't align with how you think it should behave. Very simply put, stories form expectations. And when expectations are not met, they cause resistance and suffering. Later on, we'll discuss how some stories can help us view the world more positively, and how others can risk causing us unnecessary suffering. We'll also discuss what tools we can use to identify stories in the world around us, and specifically stories that we might not be aware of in our own minds in the form of values and beliefs. Building an awareness of the benefits and risks of stories, we can then understand how to use them to our advantage as a tool for living a good life. This awareness will also help make you catch stories and beliefs before they root themselves in the mind and lead us to suffer unconsciously. Towards the end, we'll go through the risks associated with stories, and to finish, I'll outline some things you can do to practically help use stories to your advantage, rather than allow them to seep into your beliefs, values and character without you knowing, where they risk being detrimental to our well-being, like weeds in a garden. The author of Sapiens and Homo Deus, Yuval Noah Harari, describes this concept as having stories serve us, rather than us serving them. To begin, I think it's important to say that stories have been one of the greatest tools available to our species. Our collective ability to share and listen to stories has allowed us to become the most powerful animal on the planet. As humans, we don't have large claws, we don't have rows of sharp teeth. We're not particularly strong or resilient compared to other creatures, but we do, however, possess extraordinary minds. The human brain has given us the capacity for complex storytelling, and through these stories, we can do what no other animal can do: exchange large amounts of information quickly and efficiently. Stories have not only given us the ability to share large quantities of information, they have also allowed us to bring one another together under collective and agreed beliefs, values and goals. Our stories can rally us to a cause by speaking directly to our values and our needs. They have the power to spread brotherhood, violence, joy, fear, or peace. This human ability to communicate has meant that hundreds, thousands, and millions of humans are able to work together collaboratively, achieving far more than was previously possible in our early history. A history of fragmented social groups, warring tribes, and individual countries with differing beliefs, values, and cultures. However, there is a darker side to our storytelling. Stories can also be very destructive. Our bloodiest past paints a stark picture of how differing beliefs and differing cultural narratives can cause misunderstanding, intolerance, and violence. These days, conflict between different groups of people is caused more by the stories we grow up in than anything else. Stories create culture, culture creates belief, and belief influences behavior. With all this in mind, we can structure the context of stories as two sides of the same coin. Firstly, we know that stories have helped bind us in collaborative social groups. They have increased our number from mere hundreds to millions, and in doing so, we have multiplied our ability to solve problems, develop solutions, and progress as a species. On the other side of the same coin, stories are responsible for our differences. Every one of us walks a unique journey through life, and as we do, we pick up different lessons and experiences along the way. Our uniqueness results in the differing beliefs, values, and opinions caused by these experiences. And as individuals, this variation can create anything from a Tibetan monk to the member of a drug cartel. And as a culture, it can create anything from a safe, wealthy, and prosperous community to violent criminal cities and war-torn dictatorships. At this point, I'll outline the definition I'm using for story to provide some context for the ideas and the examples that we'll be exploring in the next section. In its simplest form, a story here is something that we can identify easily for ourselves by asking the following question. If humans did not exist, would this thing exist? If the answer is no, then it's very likely you're thinking of a story, a creation of mankind. For example, trees will exist in the absence of humanity. Magnetism will exist in the absence of humanity. Gravity, electrochemistry, thermodynamics, Newton's laws, the conservation of momentum, and photosynthesis will all exist. They wouldn't necessarily have names, but the principles would exist out in nature. These are the things that exist outside human thought. Things that we observe, not things we create. However, capitalism, democracy, communism, the stock market, Christianity, monotheism, polytheism, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and even philosophy would not exist. These are products of humanity, seeds of the human mind. These are examples of stories because they would not exist if humanity had not created them. This distinction can also go some way to explain why more and more people are becoming atheist or agnostic, while at the same time religion is in decline, because as our science develops and we begin to answer more questions through observation, we remove the need for our stories to explain the world around us. That being said, stories are not bad things, and in many cases they are absolutely necessary. As we've mentioned, stories have historically allowed us to work together, bind us in common pursuits, and work towards creating the quality of life that we enjoy today. I'll add further structure to the concept of stories by dividing them into two groups: stories of the individual and stories of the culture. Starting with stories of the individual, each and every one of us holds within our brain a library of information, a collection of lessons, observations, and experiences that have formed our beliefs, our thoughts, and our values. Some of this will be made up of facts and observation, and some of it will be assumptions, generalizations, ideas held only on faith, or ideas held because of the trust we have in what people have told us. And not all of it is necessarily true or beneficial to our own well-being. As an individual, our beliefs are often personal and deeply private. Some of us will make a conscious effort with our personal development, and as a result we have a number of beliefs that we have chosen intentionally to improve how we live. Others of us go through life mostly unconsciously, adopting beliefs from the world around us without doing much to question whether they're valid or not. Whatever path we choose to take, we will all have a varying number of conscious and unconscious beliefs, a complex soup of ideas, thoughts, and perspectives. In isolation, one of these beliefs can be relatively straightforward. With a little meditation, reflection, and effort, we can become aware of it, and then we can examine it. We can decide whether it's realistic, and we can decide whether it's beneficial, or whether it's false and destructive. We can then try and understand the cause of the belief, and then we can question it, we can challenge it, and attempt to reframe it to improve our well-being. This activity can be thought of like fixing a bug in a computer program if our mind was running software. However, in reality, it's really not that easy. We are not just made up of single beliefs. Our character is a complex mixture of hundreds or even thousands of interwoven beliefs, interwoven thoughts, assumptions, biases, and lessons. This complexity makes any observation or analysis difficult to outline and articulate, because everything is dependent on each other and it's all mixed together like interwoven spaghetti. But if we want to improve the quality of our life, we need to try to navigate this complexity and examine the conditions of our mind. Many of our common beliefs are stories. They wouldn't exist if humanity had not created them. Some are more widespread than others, and they come in the form of pre-existing frameworks, like Stoic philosophy, ideology, religion, cults, superstitions, or concepts like destiny, fate, karma, and spirituality. Some beliefs are more personal and unique. These are things like, how do we define success? What does happiness look like for us? How do I view myself? How do I view others? How do I view the world around me? And as tools for living a good life, self-examination, visualization, and philosophy can be very powerful. They challenge us to question ourselves. They help us develop awareness of the nature of our mind, the form of our character, and provide a compass for its direction based on what we believe is right and true. Marcus Aurelius once said the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. And the Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, men are not disturbed by things, but the view they have of them. Both ancient Stoics picked up on a common theme here. Our mind dictates how we live. Just as the lens of a camera dictates the quality of the picture, a dirty lens will produce a poor image, and a mind of negative and limiting beliefs will produce a life of suffering. Therefore, the beliefs we have and the stories we hold will directly affect how we live. Luckily for us, we have the power to change our beliefs, and in doing so, we can change our experience and get closer to living a good life. And this is our responsibility. Let's take a look at self-examination. While using stories and beliefs to our advantage can be a powerful tool for living a good and happy life, as we've said, they can just as easily create suffering, hatred, jealousy, anxiety, and depression if we let them fester unexamined. It's our individual responsibility to examine our beliefs and make sure that they are serving us rather than hindering us. This can take time and a fair amount of effort. And even when we have developed an awareness to see our thoughts more clearly, some of our beliefs and stories may be very deeply rooted or hiding under layers of experience and pain. It is extremely likely that many, if not all of us, have some deeply rooted beliefs that are causing us some sort of suffering in our lives. Beliefs that have been picked up unconsciously as we've grown up and moved through the world. It is up to us to find them, to question them, to change them, like cleaning the lens of the camera. Examples of these limiting beliefs can include ideas like the expectation that life should always be fair. It could also include more popular ideas like the law of attraction, which promises the practitioner that if they hold in their mind a vision of the future, you will send ripples through the world and the universe that will listen and rearrange itself based on this vision to make it come true. Things like this seem like a very childish expectation of the world. And to me, it's always seemed more than a little arrogant to think that there is a conscious universe that will rearrange itself based on your individual belief. It also creates a narrative whereby we rely on the universe to provide for us, rather than taking ownership and responsibility for our own well-being. For me, a more mature expectation would be that the universe is indifferent to us, in the same way that the ocean is indifferent to the fish it contains. It is therefore up to us to earn the lives we want and accept life as it comes. As a final thought before we move on to the next subject, it's not possible for us to know the intricate details and workings of everything around us. We inevitably have to fill the gaps in our understanding with assumptions, estimations, and details of our own. For example, when we have an interaction with someone, we can't know them completely, so we build an estimation of who they are. In this way, much of our life is influenced by our beliefs, because it is our beliefs that flavor these assumptions. Moving on to cultural stories. We as humans like to bind into groups, and there is a certain amount of tribalism in human nature. When enough people agree on the same story, it begins to form a part of our culture. Collective cultural stories are those that draw people together, for better or for worse. At their best, they allow us to flourish, improve equality, develop technology and medicine, provide healthcare and education. They allow us to progress at an accelerated pace compared to what is otherwise possible in smaller social groups. And in doing so, we improve our quality of life as we work towards common goals, and we share our resources for the benefit of the group. It's also worth mentioning that similar to the individual, not all cultural stories benefit us. There are cultural stories that bring people together to work towards destructive outcomes, ones that cause large amounts of suffering. We've seen examples of this in past holy wars, genocide, discrimination, and slavery, for example. And it's important to consider the impact of such damaging stories and narratives. In doing so, we can develop an awareness of how much suffering can be caused by bad stories, and we are then better able to avoid them, rather than allowing them to slip by into our minds and our culture, where they can root themselves and begin to allow history to repeat itself. Every day we come into multiple stories of culture. Whenever we buy something, we are participating in the story of money. With money, we have culturally agreed that some piece of paper, or a coin, or a number on a screen has some value. Without the agreed upon story of money, this little piece of paper is worth very little. This story of money has allowed economies to grow far beyond what they would be if we were still trading in labour and goods. For example, it's much easier for me to go and buy a new pair of shoes with my money than it would be for me to agree with the shoemaker how much milk from my cows he would like for his nice new pair of trainers. Most of us have also agreed on the story of being a participating citizen of a nation. We pay our taxes so that the education system is available for our young people, healthcare can take care of our sick, roads can facilitate our travel, and our police force can reduce crime. We also come into contact with smaller stories as well. Whenever we play poker or a board game, we're agreeing upon the rules of the game. If we start to trade stocks, we are participating in the story of the stock market. And if we go to pray, we are buying into the stories of religion. And in other more direct ways, stories are also used by media distributors to make us think certain ways, to romanticize worldviews, or demonize groups or cultures. Advertisers have us believe stories to sell us products. Perfume adverts show romance and mystery. Fast food adverts show us images of happy families, sitting around tables sharing a meal with smiling faces. Pharmaceuticals show us people bright-faced, healthy, and full of energy. These types of stories are used to sell us products by showing us what our lives could be if we bought the product or service. Of course, the stories are rarely honest or accurate, but as advertisers know, people spend more money as a result of emotion than logic. So given all of this information, what can we do with it to live better lives? To begin with, we need to develop awareness. We can't use the stories and beliefs to our advantage until we are first aware of what they are and why we believe in them. This awareness is most easily developed through meditation. Or if you're really struggling with something, it's most easily developed through seeing a mental health professional. This content is not designed to be a replacement for that. Essentially, we have to sit and observe our thoughts and our feelings. In doing so over time, we become familiar with the patterns of our mind, and we begin to see the underlying beliefs, expectations, and stories that are responsible for our thoughts, actions, and reactions. After awareness, we can then start to question and challenge. Before being sentenced to death, Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. And through examination, we can challenge and question our beliefs. We can ask questions about whether they are constructive, such as things like there is plenty of opportunity in the world. People are mostly good, we're all just trying to do our best. We're living in the best time in human history. I will make the best use of what's within my power, and I'll accept the rest as it comes. Or are they destructive? Such as people are idiots, selfish and mean. I can control other people. People should respect me. Life is terrible, there is no opportunity. I'm so unlucky, the world has it in for me. Or the earth is flat. Some other things that we can do is make an effort to be aware of the differences between stories and reality. And day to day we can try and understand the purpose of the stories around us. Is it there to sell you something? Is it there to make you vote a certain way? Or are the stories we're telling ourselves only there to validate our bad behavior and stop us from taking accountability for what we're doing? Even our own expectations can come in the form of stories. They can be about what we expect from the world, what we expect from other people, and what we expect from ourselves. I really believe it's worth spending time to understand our expectations, because if they are unrealistic, they could be setting you up to get frustrated, jealous, angry, and upset. Because events don't happen as we want them to. They just happen as they do. Welcome to Orion Philosophy, where we explore, discuss, and dissect areas of practical philosophy for use in everyday life. There is a concept in Stoic philosophy that can transform our frustrations into acceptance, our anger into understanding, and can help us focus our limited time each day on the things that create real impact and change in our life, rather than mistakenly and unknowingly focusing on the things that waste it. This is the Stoic concept of control. Simply put, we can't always control what happens to us, but we can always decide how we react to it. Our response is our responsibility, and it's a choice. Today we're going to explore the ancient Stoic philosophy behind this concept and look at how we can implement it in our daily life. The philosopher Epictetus was born into slavery in ancient Greece. He was permitted by his master to study Stoic philosophy under the guidance of philosopher Musonius Rufus. Epictetus earned his freedom around the age of 18, shortly after the death of Emperor Nero. With this newfound freedom, he took to Rome to teach his philosophy for a further 25 years, until Emperor Domitian banned philosophers from the city because of the threat their free thinking had on the control of his rule. This meant that Epictetus ended up leaving Rome and settling in the newly formed city of Nicopolis in ancient Greece. Here he lived a simple life and founded a school of philosophy where he taught until he passed away from old age. Sadly, Epictetus didn't write any of his work down. However, we are left with the work of one of his students who transcribed the lectures of Epictetus close to word for word. Of 8 books written, only 4 survive. But for me, these 4 contain some of the best practical philosophy from the ancient world. Within this is one of the core teachings of Epictetus' Stoic philosophy, the concept of control. He taught that a path to a happy life, a life of what the Stoics call Eudaimonia, can be found in 2 things. The first is correctly identifying what is within our control and identifying what is not. The second is focusing our efforts on the things within our control and learning to accept what is not with grace and understanding. This distinction is an important one because no matter how much we try, no matter how upset we get or frustrated we become, we cannot change the things outside the reach of our control. A life of attempting to do so will undoubtedly result in bitterness, frustration, and wasted effort. On the other hand, a life focused on doing what we can with what we have and focusing on what's within our power is much more likely to be productive, effective, and altogether more constructive. Epictetus said, "The chief task in life is simply this, to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control and which have to do with the choices I actually control. Where then do I look for good and evil? Not to uncontrollable externals, but within myself, to the choices that are my own." This particular concept in Stoicism is widely known as the dichotomy of control. So called because things are really only divided into what we can control and what we can't. Epictetus took this further and helped describe exactly what's within our power and what's not. He also helped us understand the pitfalls of spending too much time focusing on changing what we have no power to change, and the benefits of focusing on the areas of life within our power to change. In his writing, his student recounts the following. There are things that are within our power, and things that fall outside our power. Within our power are our own opinions, aims, desires, dislikes. In a sum, our own thoughts and actions. Outside our power are our physical characteristics, the class into which we were born, our reputation in the eyes of others, and honors and offices that may be bestowed on us. Working within our sphere of control, we are naturally free, independent and strong. Beyond that sphere, we are weak, limited and dependent. If you pin your hopes on things outside your control, taking upon yourself things which rightfully belong to others, you are liable to stumble, fall, suffer, and blame both gods and men. But if you focus your attention only on what is truly your own concern, and leave to others what concerns them, then you will be in charge of your interior life. No one will be able to harm or hinder you. You will blame no one, and have no enemies. If you wish to have peace and contentment, release your attachment to all things outside your control. This is the path of freedom and happiness. If you want not just peace and contentment, but power and wealth too, you may forfeit the former in seeking the latter and will lose your freedom and happiness along the way. The Stoic Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius also wrote about similar concepts in his journal. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. So how can we harness this Stoic practice and turn it into a daily habit to increase our happiness and resilience? For me, a good and important first step is training our mind to quickly sort the things around us and within us into one of two categories. Essentially inside our control or outside our control. And then something a lot easier said than done, we have to learn to accept the things that are outside our control as they are, and at the same time take full responsibility for everything inside our control. These two things are important because when we get it wrong, we suffer. And we normally suffer in one of two ways. The first way we suffer is trying to control things in life we have no influence over. This can be other people, their beliefs, their thoughts, actions and values, the weather, the traffic, the economy, politics, time and many, many other things. Obviously, when we try and control the uncontrollable, we're putting effort into an endeavor in which we have no leverage. This results in us having little or no impact. And this result ends up with us feeling powerless, frustrated, anxious, ineffective, bitter and angry. In a nutshell, we suffer. No one likes to put effort into something and get nothing in return. Or worse yet, put effort into something and get the complete opposite we want in return. And because we have no control over these situations, if we attach our happiness to them, we're essentially putting our happiness into the hands of chance and the hands of the whim of the world around us. So it's easy to see why this is not a resilient form of happiness. If everything is going well around us, we'll be happy. If everything is going poorly, we'll be sad. Our happiness will come and go based on external events and how they transpire, which is a very fragile way of living. The second way we suffer is we don't take responsibility for what we can control. These are our beliefs, our values, our perspectives, and our actions. When we don't take responsibility for these things and instead blame the world or other people for things like our actions, we're essentially saying that we don't have autonomy over what we do and who we are. This is a very helpless mindset to have, and it will wear you down over time. People stuck here often complain, moan, point fingers, whinge, and create a mentality of victimhood because the world is always acting upon them. And as they respond to the world acting upon them, they blame what happens in the world for their response. This is not a healthy place to be, because if we believe that we don't have any control over our actions, our perspectives, values, and beliefs, there's nothing we can do to get out of the situation we're in. We just have to wait until the world around us does something that creates an outcome in us that we're happy with. And again, it's probably easy to see why this way of living doesn't produce lasting and resilient happiness, because everything is still at the whim of the world around us. Our well-being is beholden to externals, rather than being our responsibility to cultivate. The Stoic dichotomy of control helps us shift our perspective of these things in two important ways. When we are able to determine what is outside our control, we no longer waste our time and energy trying to change it. We see it for what it is, we accept it, and we move on to what we can control. When we are able to determine what is within our control, we are able to focus our time and energy here, taking responsibility and taking actions in these areas to move forward. Epictetus also said, "Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens." And it's all well and good understanding these logically, but it takes practice, and it requires deliberate effort to start building those mental pathways. But if you stick with it, soon splitting these things into two different categories becomes second nature, and you'll naturally see these two pathways and use it to determine how to act in the face of events around you. And to leave you with some final thoughts, in his book A Guide to the Good Life, William Irvine explores this subject of control and describes the following. Remember that the things over which we have complete control are the goals we set for ourselves. I think that when a Stoic concerns himself with the things over which he has some but not complete control, such as winning a tennis match, he will be very careful about the goals he sets for himself. In particular, he will be careful to set internal rather than external goals. Thus, his goal in playing tennis will not be to win the match, something external over which he has only partial control, but to play to the best of his ability in the match, something internal over which he has complete control. By choosing this goal, he will spare himself the frustration or disappointment should he lose the match. Since it was not his goal to win the match, he will not have failed to attain his goal as long as he played his best. His tranquility will not be disrupted. Irvine also wrote, "Stoics would recommend, for example, that I concern myself with whether my wife loves me, even though this is something over which I have some but not complete control. But when I do concern myself with this, my goal should not be the external goal of making her love me. No matter how hard I try, I could fail to achieve this goal, and would as a result be quite upset. Instead, my goal should be an internal goal, to behave to the best of my ability in a lovable manner. Similarly, my goal with respect to my boss should be to do my job to the best of my ability. These goals I can achieve no matter how my wife and my boss subsequently react to my efforts. By internalizing his goals in daily life, the Stoic is able to preserve his tranquility while dealing with things over which he has only partial control. Today we're going to be learning to use Stoic philosophy to turn resistance into acceptance and frustration into a source of gratitude and well-being. Modern life can be chaotic and frustrating at times. We've all had days where we felt overwhelmed with work, responsibilities, grief, pain, and any number of external events that threaten to destabilize our peace of mind. Here at Orion Philosophy, we bring out videos every week specifically to tackle the imbalance between sources of suffering in the world around us and the tools that we're given to deal with them. It's great to see the community growing around this goal, and if you think it's something that you'd like, feel free to sub and join us. To that end, today we're going through the Stoic principle of amor fati, and the practice of shifting our perception of the things around us, from resistance and suffering, to acceptance, understanding, and ultimately love. Ancient Stoic philosophy contains a number of core practices that help the practitioner change the way they look at life, and in such a way that their burdens are lessened, their stress is eased, and in many cases they go through a transformation of things they once thought to be sources of pain and hardship, and shift them into sources of strength and understanding. We'll be covering exactly what amor fati means, and looking specifically at how you can use it in your day-to-day life to help balance, develop, and maintain your mental well-being. Socrates once said that we are the caretakers of our soul, and hopefully today you'll take away some tools to become exactly that. First of all, if amor fati is learning to love fate, what exactly do we mean when we say fate? To be honest, this can be interpreted in many different ways. For me personally, a practical definition of fate in this context is simply the unraveling of everything that has happened, everything that is happening, and everything that will happen. These happenings are determined by the nature of the world around us, they're determined by the laws of physics, and the events that have transpired previously, leading to subsequent events, like complex dominoes knocking into one another. This domino analogy might bring up questions about determinism or free will, and it's outside the scope of this video. However, if you personally have an opinion on free will or determinism, let me know in the comments down below because I think it's a fascinating topic. But coming back to fate, I don't think that fate in this context has anything to do with an overall universal consciousness or anything deliberately dictating what does and doesn't happen. So then what is amor fati? Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart." Literally speaking, amor fati is a Latin phrase that translates roughly as love of fate, and it's been used for thousands of years to describe a state of mind or a practice in which you accept and even embrace everything that has happened, is happening, and has yet to happen. It's the mindset of understanding and accepting that the nature of the universe is change, that much of this change is outside the reach of our control, and that without this change we would not exist, our relationships wouldn't exist, we wouldn't laugh, cry, love, create, or grow. Without everything that has come before now, and without everything that is happening now, we wouldn't experience any of what life has to offer, both the good and the bad. And in this way, from this perspective, we can learn to love everything that has come before us, and everything that's happening around us, and then by extension, learn to love fate.